There was a moment of clarity when I was told that I probably had about 12 to 36 months to live. Obviously, they were wrong because that was
Yeah.
nine years ago. But
Wow.
there was,
Congratulations.
thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, a doctor recently told me that it was my self-advocacy that was probably the reason I was still alive.
Welcome to the Building the Noise podcast.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Building the Noise. I'm Matt Toresco, and with me today is an unbelievable legal advocate, patient advocate, and all-around driven patient that is here to help you understand everything that you deserve when it comes to healthcare and how you can ensure that you know what exists and what is valuable for you in the moment. Abigail Johnston. Abigail, it's a privilege to have you with us today. I'm excited for our discussion. And to kick things off, if you could tell us a little bit about your role as the director of mentorship and legal clinics at Project Life and what Project Life is really all about.
Well, Matt, thank you so much for having me today. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about my experiences and also the advocacy that I have somewhat fallen into since my diagnosis with stage
Yes.
4 metastatic breast cancer back in 2017. So, Project Life is a virtual wellness house for the metastatic breast cancer community by the metastatic breast cancer community. We are somewhat unique in that we are entirely patient-led. So all of us on the
Wow.
leadership team, are living with the same diagnosis as the people that we serve. And our founder, Leslie Glenn, founded the organization because of two things. Number one, those of us who are always in active treatment for cancer are oftentimes left out of survivorship programs. Survivorship programs, which are designed to help you, it's really designed to help people kind of get back to real life, so to speak. But the supportive services are also necessary for those of us who will never be done with cancer treatment. And so this idea of active treatment then excludes a lot of us who oftentimes need more services, quite frankly, than people who are done. So that was the first gap that she identified and that a lot of us experienced. The other thing that a lot of us experienced is that people who start nonprofits, very well-meaning people, when they start a nonprofit that is focused on the early stage experience, not the terminal cancer, but the cancer that's, you get diagnosed, you have treatment, you're done, you move into survivorship. People who do that don't fully grasp a lot of times the metastatic experience and that we will be in treatment until we die, that we are constantly losing people in our community. It's just a different weight. And so we got together and she founded and then pull all of us along to serve our community in the best way that we possibly can. So I run two different pieces of our programming. The mentorship program is where we connect people one-on-one for that guidance, that connection with somebody who's going through the same thing that you are. We have mentors that are living with metastatic breast cancer. We have spouses who are supporting someone living with metastatic breast cancer. We have adult children who then support other adult children of someone living with metastatic breast cancer. And we've got moms and dads of people who are living with metastatic breast cancer. So we really look at the whole family as much as we can to provide that support. Again, one-on-one. And then the other thing is I run legal clinics. So once a month, I get people together who have questions where cancer and legal stuff intersect, which is a lot. And we talk about those things. I give people guidance. I do a lot of one-on-ones, walking people through various legal processes, mostly about insurance and disability type things and fighting with your insurance company or figuring out how to, all the billing that comes in. It's all very practical things. But I find that
all the healthcare fuckery, for lack of better terminology.
I totally agree. Yes, it becomes a full-time job, and it shouldn't be. So I find that my experience of more than 20 years of being a trial attorney, I'm able to cut through some of the things, give people tricks that I've learned, and that helps them feel like they can address some of these things on their own.
So tell me, because you had said, you referenced the fact that you fell into your role, right? It came to you. I think a lot of people get in situations like yours and don't think there's any value that they can provide. How did you identify this opportunity, and what was it that made you say, you know what, I'm going to give back to my community?
So I would describe myself as a workaholic. I certainly worked far too many hours when I was
We are
practicing
kindred
law.
spirits.
But there was a moment of clarity when I was told that I probably had about 12 to 36 months to live. Obviously, they were wrong because that was
Yeah.
nine years ago. But
Wow.
there was,
Congratulations.
thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, a doctor recently told me that it was my self-advocacy that was probably the reason I was still alive. So I'm holding on to that.
Yeah.
Um, but anyway, when I was diagnosed, there was that moment of clarity that I wanted to spend time with my kids. I didn't want to necessarily be in an office all day long. And at the
Sure.
time of diagnosis, my kids were turning 2 and 4. So they were really
Oh,
little. And at that point, legitimately, if I had died within the timeline I was given, my kids probably wouldn't have remembered very much about me because they were so little. And so
oh,
there was that moment of clarity of I'm not going to spend all day long at the office. And so I closed my firm. I, got all my employees to get other jobs. We shifted all the clients to friends of mine. I mean, it took
mhm.
about a year, quite frankly, to unravel all of that. But then my kids started school and I started looking around going, oh, wait a second. I'm alone all day long, like, when they're at school. And what am I going to
Yeah.
do with myself? Because I was born in the Midwest and there's this concept of usefulness that is kind of baked into my DNA.
Sure.
Plus, I went to law school to help people. And so that was always a piece in the back of my mind that I had a purpose, that my purpose was to use my talents to experience training, et cetera, to help people.
Yeah.
And so I started looking around to find the things that would feel useful to me or feel like something that was an outpouring of some of my own experiences and
Sure.
training and all of that. So I started doing a lot of legislative advocacy at the beginning. And for anybody who's done legislative advocacy, it's like banging your head against the wall. You work really hard to push the boulder like just another inch. And so while I still do a fair amount of legislative advocacy, I knew that was maybe not exactly
Sure.
where I was going to be the most useful. And so I went to several trainings, right? Different advocacy trainings. I attended a very dense scientific training called Project LEAD, which is something that the National Breast Cancer Coalition puts on every year and is amazing, but focused on the science of breast cancer.
Sure.
And while I was able to attend and participate in that program, I also really understood not going to be my forte because I don't have a scientific background. And it was very helpful, but I knew that that wasn't going to be my sweet spot. And then I got trained as a mentor and
Mm.
realized that this was something that was more up my alley, this one-on-one piece, this coaching, this sharing from my own experiences. And when Leslie started Project Life and then started looking for who she thought would be a good fit, she called me. And I can vividly remember we were driving home from Miami after a visit
Fun.
with some of my family. And she was like, do you want to join me in this thing? And I jumped at it because it just felt right. I had
Sure.
already been doing some legal clinics with some other organizations, but not regularly, kind of here and there, doing different webinars, doing different educational opportunities. And I loved the fact that Leslie lets me make it up as I go and figure out what works. And she doesn't
Yeah.
micromanage me. She lets me do my thing. And that has been a real value for a lot of people.
Sure. And I noticed that you have your master's in education as well as your Juris Doctorate, correct? So,
Yeah.
as you said, value, wanting to be useful. I think you've gone over and above. But did this all take place after you had that master's already? This desire to educate?
Yes, I actually went back to school and got my master's degree after I was practicing law already because I was an educational advocate for children in foster care. And so
Ah,
I would sit at these meetings and felt like they were all speaking a foreign language
sure.
because I was homeschooled. I didn't go to public school myself. And so I went back to school to get my master's degree so that I could better advocate for the foster
Sure.
kids that I was working with.
Homeschool to UCF.
Yes.
That's quite a jump.
I did go to high school. I went to a public high
Okay.
school. And then, yes, I got my undergraduate degree at UCF. So I went from a class in high school of less than 100 people to quite literally the largest university in the country.
Yes, yes, right. I mean, I know that feeling, not from that small, but going to Ohio State and being in a lecture of 400 to 500 kids is kind of
Yep.
nuts. And I think one of the things that taught me, at least, is that you got to fight for yourself if you have questions.
Oh, 100%. The other thing for
Right.
me too is that I was in an area where there were no people other than white people. We had a few families, I think,
Sure.
some African Americans, some Chinese people in our school district, but it was very small. And then I went to UCF, which is
Very diverse.
very international. So anyway, it was a very big change, but it was what I needed to open
Sure.
my eyes to the experiences of other people that had not grown up like I had.
Yeah, and the reason I bring that up is I find myself going back to when I was younger, and I didn't speak much. I had a twin brother who was, the charismatic one, and I didn't have to, right? I was kind of in my shell as a twin.
Mm.
And going to a big school like that, I was actually told by one of my parents I was going to drown because it was going to swallow me up to
Oh my
go somewhere
goodness.
so big. Yeah, very encouraging. But I find that gave me such a great foundation of advocacy and having to advocate for myself. Do you feel that time of your life and that transition to such a large institution did the same for you? Or what would you have said you learned from that experience?
I sometimes say I feel like advocacy is just kind of in my DNA. I
Sure.
was the oldest of six, and I did not have any trouble opening my mouth. But the transition from kind of a small pond to such a gigantic pond was
Yeah.
something that taught me a lot about effectiveness. That there are certain ways of speaking up that are more effective than others,
Sure.
and college is such a good time to try things out, right?
Yeah.
And do
Yeah.
different things.
You can make mistakes at that point in your life,
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
and I think it's a big learning opportunity too for patients to recognize that you can make mistakes as a patient too,
Yes.
right? I mean, I can't tell you the number of appointments I was kicked out of the office because I was asking too many questions or I was too pushy. What are your
Yes.
thoughts on patients needing to understand where that line is and sometimes cross it?
So I'm a big believer in we're all going to do illness, whatever illness we have, in our way. So
Mm,
that you have somebody who has the background of somebody like me, who's a
yeah,
lawyer, who's very much comfortable speaking up and challenging people. I'm going to do things differently than, say, somebody who's a project manager or
sure.
somebody who has a healthcare background, right? And so when I talk to people about advocacy, what I focus on always first is getting to know yourself, understanding you. So there are people who that idea of walking into an appointment is so incredibly daunting that
Yeah,
there's a wall. They're just like, okay, I can't do advocacy then. For me, that is not a problem. That has never been a problem. I honestly think at some point, someone in every practice I've been at labels me as difficult because
yes.
that's in all the notes. And I used to worry about that. And my husband, honestly, he's from Jamaica. And so
Mm,
there's a lot of that worry that by speaking up and being difficult, that I might be told to go elsewhere. And
sure,
certainly there have been some doctors who have just been like, you just don't fit with our practice. Here's, where you should go, that sort of thing. And that's oftentimes exactly what's happening. Sometimes I've left practices too because
sure.
it just didn't fit what I needed. And that idea of voting with your feet, to
Hmm.
me, is something that I don't think anybody should be afraid of. Now, let me take two steps back and say those people
Sure.
who are in rural areas where there's maybe fewer doctors might not have as many options or may not be able to vote with their feet. And so I do think that, again, taking two steps back, knowing who you are, knowing what options are available to you in terms of insurance or traveling or access and things like that, it's always a good place to start.
Sure.
But what we can't do, what nobody can do, is be a passive recipient. because our system is not designed for a passive recipient to get the right care.
Amen. That is so dead on. I think so many people get dropped, as you referenced, dropped into a diagnosis and don't know where to begin, right? And if they have that mindset of being passive in healthcare, or even, I would say, paternalistic, right? Looking at medicine and physicians as holier than thou and they know everything, where do you feel they should begin?
Connecting with other patients. I think that has been the number one significant positive thing about my experience with living with terminal cancer, is to connect with other people. But the biggest piece is that everybody approaches it very differently. And so those people who are coming from a healthcare background, they have a certain amount of insight. I come from, looking at risk and risk management and, reading all the fine print. I look at things very differently, and so on and so forth to all the different people. And so having that backup, having that background, and I have learned more about what I need to do as a patient from other patients than I've ever learned from anybody in healthcare. Because our system is designed for compliance. Our system is designed for people to be quiet and just follow along. Yes, we do.
Right?
Sometimes in the notes, they talk about compliance.
Yes. You're non-compliant. You mean I didn't do exactly what you wanted me to do because I didn't feel good enough to do it?
Right. Yes.
Right?
And I am very compliant when it's something that needs to happen.
Sure.
But if it does not work for me, or if it does not fit, then I am probably the most non-compliant person. But only in the way that it's in my best interest, that this is something that needs to happen in this way. But connecting with other people who are farther along, who have had the experience of advocating for themselves in a particular disease diagnosis, that is the number one thing that I suggest to people who are newly diagnosed.
Yeah. Yep. I could not agree more. That I learned so much from engaging with other patients, from what's worked for them, what I should look out for, who to stay away from, especially, as you said, voting with your feet. It may be moving states, which I did. And okay, so I went from New Jersey to South Carolina. I didn't know who to see, but other patients in that area do, and they've had that experience. And going to an organization like Project Life that is able to put you in touch with peers, true peers, right? Not the way insurance companies see peer-to-peer type programs, right? Where I'm a doctor, but I'm nowhere close to your specialty, but we'll call it a peer. No, people who are living the same experiences as you are able to help you walk that walk because they're already in it with you.
100%. And I don't think there's anything more powerful in the English language than someone saying, "Oh, me too."
Yeah.
Because we feel so isolated and we feel so alone, and we feel like we're the only people who are encountering a challenge. But when someone else has navigated the same thing and maybe are farther along, I can't even find the words to say how valuable from a psychological perspective that is.
Yeah. If you don't mind, if I could go back 9 years to your diagnosis, and that hits everyone differently.
Yeah.
But what were your initial steps?
So I was misdiagnosed for a bit. So initially, I was 38. I had my own law firm. I had my boys. They were 1 and 3. And I was still tandem breastfeeding. So I was breastfeeding both of my boys. And I felt a lump. Now, I had never had a mammogram because I was under 40 and it was not indicated. So
there's a whole nother rabbit hole we could go down.
Oh, yes. Now, I am fortunate in that the primary care physician that I had did not say I was too young for a mammogram, did not blow me off. She said, let's just do a mammogram just to be sure. She's like, I don't really think it's anything. She actually said she was 95% sure it was nothing. And looking back, I don't know if she said that to make sure that I wasn't anxious.
Yeah.
But all the statistics were against me having breast cancer at all. So I went for that mammogram, was diagnosed with breast cancer. My mother had gone through breast cancer, but we didn't know if we had any kind of genetic predisposition yet at that time. And so when I said, hey, I think we should do a scan and just make sure it's nowhere else, the medical oncologist I was seeing said, you've had surgery, the lymph nodes are negative, all the statistics are against you having anything elsewhere. And he said, if you really want me to, we'll try, but I think it's going to be hard to get insurance to cover it. There was kind of a ongoing, like, this is going to be difficult kind of conversation.
Already in the physician's mindset.
Yes. And so I said, okay, because I didn't know yet that feeling in my gut, I wasn't trusting it enough yet. And I will tell you that is the last time I ignored that feeling in my gut.
Yes.
So I started chemotherapy, which was the traditional treatment. They thought I was stage 2. And so that was the next step in the treatment for stage 2 breast cancer. And it was one of a series of medical mistakes that the nurse checked a box to check my tumor markers, which is protein that runs around in your blood and can be elevated if there's cancer. And so my doctor called me on a Saturday, the day after my very first chemotherapy treatment, when I was still completely out of it because of all the pre-meds, and started talking about how there was something wrong and I needed to get the scan that I had asked for. And so, at that point, I wasn't completely freaked out. It was kind of more like, okay, just one more thing.
Part of the protocol, yeah.
Exactly. And so I had the scan, and then I got the call that I just needed to come in and see him. It didn't matter when I arrived. I just needed to come. And I was back at work by that point. And so I was, juggling a myriad of things at my office. And so when I called my husband and I said, they just called and said, come, it doesn't matter when, but I'll just go, no big deal, whatever. I am so thankful that my husband, he had been a caregiver for his father through 3 strokes. And so a little more familiar with the medical system than I was.
Sure.
And so when I was like, this is no big deal, he's like, yeah, I think this is a big deal and I'm coming. So I went to my last hearing that day and my husband went with me. And then we, so we only had one car, and then we drove to the oncologist's office. And initially, when we had met with this oncologist, he said very confidently, this is going to be a chapter in your life. You are going to get through this. You're going to get to the other side, and then you will put cancer in your rearview mirror, and you're going to die of something else. That's what he said in our initial appointment.
Wow.
But this day, in June of 2017, he sat us down and he said, it's stage 4. It's everywhere. It's it was in my bone, in all of my bones. So it wasn't in the organs at that point, but it was literally in every bone in my body. I had fractures all over. I had been dealing with some pain, but I had not said anything because to me, pain in my back or my leg had nothing to do with my breast.
Sure. Yeah.
Those were not connected to me. And then he said, now cancer is going to kill you. It is no longer going to be a chapter, but it will be the end of your life. And at that point, he said, statistically, 12 to 36 months was what I was looking at as the likelihood of a life expectancy. And of course, jumped into talking about all the different medication and how, there's all these innovations. So I feel like he did a great job of blending the worst news you're ever going to hear with there's some hope and getting me to focus on the right things. Mm-hmm. The other thing he did was immediately, because I was seeing a community oncologist at the very beginning, meaning somebody who is not at an academic center. It doesn't do a lot of research. It's just more involved in the clinic treating patients.
Day-to-day. Yep.
Yeah. And he immediately referred me to one of their NCI designated, the National Cancer Institute designated cancer centers. It was a few hours away, but he showed me how his ego was not going to interfere with me getting the best care. And then he retired. So anyway, that first experience was certainly what I would call baptism by fire, because in a matter of a week, I was in surgery to put titanium rods in both of my femurs because both of my femurs were, I was told, one bad step away from shattering. I had more cancer in my femurs than I ever did in my breast. And then I had multiple other surgeries. Anyway, it was a big deal. I finished out the chemotherapy that I was on and then went on what they call a first line of treatment in the metastatic setting, which thankfully was oral medication. And I've been able to be on oral medication for a fair amount of time in the last 9 years, but I am back in IV chemo at the moment.
Well, thank you for sharing that story. I think that it's a testament to your strength and willingness to fight for yourself, but also at the same time, you continued to fight for others during that as well. I mean, you went to your last your last, trial hearing that afternoon. You put yourself on the back burner. Thanks for your husband for his intuitiveness
Yes.
and him, listening through the words. I just find so many similarities between our spouses, and the fact that my first surgeon for when I broke my neck retired right after as well, and that was the downfall of me. But I wanted to go back there because I want people to understand that everyone's going to face that differently. Everyone,
Yes.
Especially in the United States, right? Where you were in as you said, a community oncology practice. And sometimes the doc might have let ego get in the way, right?
Yes.
Most people don't even know what an NCI designated center is.
And I didn't
right?
at that point, right? This was all
Sure.
learning so many things. And I certainly did not jump into advocacy. It probably was about a year before I felt, because honestly, I wasn't walking very well. After my surgery, I had a lot of physical therapy to be able to move easily again. And so it took me a bit before
Sure.
I felt like I could take my eyes off of the immediate challenges of the day and think about other people's experiences as well. So everybody kind of does that a little differently.
Not to mention your boys.
Yes. Yeah. They had turned 2 and 4 by the time I was told that it was metastatic. And I vividly remember their birthday parties that year because it was one of these, I was going through early stage cancer treatment. We didn't yet know that I was metastatic, but milestones and celebrations just take on a whole different weight and a whole different meaning when you're facing something like cancer.
Yeah. How did you do your own initial research?
So I looked for support groups. I looked online. I checked out some local options as well. But because of the fact that the kind of research that I did as a lawyer was very much focused on what evidence can I present in court. Which,
Sure.
If you take 2 steps back, the ways that I look at the reliability of evidence that I would submit is really the same way that you evaluate the reliability of an article or of data or things like that. So I was already predisposed to look for, New England Journal of Medicine, looking at clinical trial data, looking at papers that were written by thought leaders. So on social media, I started following all kinds of oncologists who are immersed in research. And I'm so thankful to so many of these brilliant people who generously share of their own expertise, papers and presentations and all of that. So I think I started following like 2,000 different doctors because I was just looking for everything that I could find. And my introduction to the medication was that the prescription that I was given by that community oncologist was exactly what all of my second, third, fourth, fifth opinions would have prescribed as well. So it was for me, it was even after being misdiagnosed, it was a good entry into what I would call the metastatic experience, in that it wasn't like I had to make a bunch of changes right away.
Sure.
After that initial recommendation or that initial prescription. And I got about 2 years of really good stability on that first line of treatment. Again, not everybody gets that.
Yeah.
And so it gave me the opportunity to be able to start going to conferences, start getting second opinions,
Immersing
even
yourself.
out of state, immersing myself. And legitimately, I looked at it as my job. Like, I closed my law practice. My kids were at school. My job was to educate myself and my husband, because, he is doing the same stuff. We're sharing with each other. learning with each other. He's the king of spreadsheets, thank God, because, I'm not as organized as he is
Sure.
when it comes to that. So, it was definitely the two of us looking at options. And I have always wanted to be as prepared as possible for each change so that things are not a surprise, because that bombshell that was dropped on us in June of 2017, I have never wanted to feel like that again, where it's this huge thing and
Yeah.
you have no frame of reference, no ability to know what in the world you're going to do. And to a certain extent, I was not asking the right questions at the beginning because I had no idea what to ask.
Yeah. That's
So
natural, completely
trying to
normal.
avoid that.
Yeah, but I think, as we've discussed previously, you're now doing that work to try to ensure that people don't get into that situation.
Yes.
And how do we help to educate the public so that before they get sick or before they get a diagnosis, they're more aware of the options and what's out there. And I think that that's one of the biggest struggles, and part of that politics and policy, right? To go into one of your lanes. I think, if I'm not mistaken, this will probably be, this upcoming midterms, one of the biggest elections around healthcare.
I agree.
And
Yep.
what are your thoughts for the patient community? And really, when I say patient community, I mean everybody, because at some point we will all be a patient.
Yes.
What should people be thinking about and looking at when it comes to legislation, and to be knowledgeable at this phase in their life, even if they are healthy?
Such important things to research and understand about candidates. And one of the things that yes, federal elections are so very important because those are the people who are very influential on kind of
Yep.
the macro level, right? But one of the things that I tell people all the time is that our judges, our school board people, the city commissioners, the local elections are just as important as the larger elections. But when it comes to the larger elections, the federal elections, the people who are going to be representing us on these higher levels,
Yeah.
understanding where the person who's running, their stance on healthcare is very important. And that stance piece has become very different for me over the years, because
Tell me more.
I did not fully understand the role of Medicare when it comes to actually influencing private policies.
Mm.
And so even if you're not 65, even
Yeah.
if you're not able to access Medicare through disability, a politician's or somebody who's running a candidate's position on Medicare and Medicaid, that to me is actually more important than people fully understand, because Medicare really leads the way in a lot of ways when they approve various medications on their formularies.
They always
Private
lead.
insurance follows that, right?
Yep.
And then there's certainly exceptions, because if you have Medicare, you can't get genetic testing to see if you have a predisposition for cancer until you actually have cancer, which still boggles my mind. And there is a
Yeah.
bill pending where we're trying to fix that. But it's easier to get genetic testing to see if you have a predisposition for cancer through private insurance than it is through Medicare. That is an exception to so many things.
Sure. Yeah.
So to me, looking at those government programs and looking at the candidates' stances on those, that to me is a good place to start, because they
Sure.
usually talk about that. Looking at someone's voting record, if they've been an elected official in any other context, because they can say a lot of things on the campaign trail, but looking at what they've actually done, that to me is really that can be really telling. That can show certainly people can change their minds and do things differently and all of
Not often.
that. So looking at what they've done versus what
Yep.
they've said, that can be something that's really important. And the third thing that I look for, which is maybe something that doesn't sound very scientific, is I look for people who have had someone with a serious diagnosis in their family.
Yep.
Because the people who have sat by somebody's bedside, the people who have walked with a family member through a serious illness, they have an understanding of our programs and what's important in a different level, in a different way. So
Yeah.
those would be my top three.
That's an amazing feedback for everyone because I could not agree more. I watch our state politicians here in South Carolina, as well as our federal ones, and I'm shocked with some of the language that they use. Even someone like Josh Hawley, who, him and Elizabeth Warren are leading the fight to change prior authorization, but also PBM reform and all of these entities that play middleman in your healthcare. He uses the word pharma to describe PBMs. And you're laughing, and our audience should know that those are not the same thing. They're nowhere close to the same thing. Yes, the PBM is the one that negotiates the price with the pharma company, but they tend to like the higher price at the PBM, higher price and higher rebate. So
Yep.
and even historically, when pharma has tried to reduce the price of drugs, it's the PBM that then blocks those drugs from being able to be used. So, the fact that your politicians don't understand some of the basics in healthcare is a worry, and something
100%.
that you should look out for.
Yes, absolutely.
Right?
Now, I've experienced so much in legislative advocacy that you're talking to health staffers more often than you actually get to talk to an elected official. And then it's those people who are tasked with educating the elected official on a particular topic. And it always cracks me up when it's, a 22-year-old right out of college who we're trying to help understand the depth and the gravity of what we're talking about. But that has more often than not been the thing that has helped, because it is those people who are educating our elected officials, who are making suggestions in terms of co-sponsoring and things like that. So if anybody has the opportunity to go, we sometimes call them Hill Days, sometimes we call them advocacy days, where it's an organization that organizes meetings with various health staffers. Sometimes it's the person who is working with your elected official, where you are a constituent, and sometimes it's not. But doing that with an organization, that has been the most valuable to me, not because on our own, we're not as effective as when we come with 5 or 6 or 10 other people, even if it's on a Zoom screen and we're not actually physically sitting in front of them.
Yeah. I mean, what are your thoughts on, patients who don't think they have anything to add to this discussion, right? And that their story is their story. It doesn't matter. They're just a small fish in this big pond.
We are all small fish in this big pond, but our experiences are how they understand the impact on a real person. And so I think about back when I was practicing law, there would be legislation that would pass. And I specifically remember years ago, one passed that reformed alimony. And there were mistakes in the bill that passed. Some things were absolute typos. Some things were just, it wasn't intended that way. And so what we called a glitch bill was then needed in order to correct the glitches, right? But the problem is that in that initial bill, in my opinion, they didn't consider enough how it would impact different groups of people that simply weren't advocating. There wasn't a representative for particular groups of people who then became significantly disenfranchised.
Sure.
And it was because it was a lack of understanding of the application. So we as people can come talk about, if this passes, this is the application on my life. And let me tell you in real time as a real person how it will apply to me. Sure. That's what they don't have. They don't have the application piece. So each of you who are experiencing healthcare, you are experiencing the application of these bills, the application of these laws or regulations or whatever they are. They can't understand that without our input.
Yeah, I think it's so vital as you talk about the glitch bill. I mean, we're now in a fight for 340B where we're trying to define what a patient is, right? And when the minutia of a bill, and getting back into the Clinton days of the definition of the word is, it seems like we're there again. But that's where it does take as many folks as possible to share their stories and share what they've experienced. But more importantly, as you've referenced, these disenfranchised groups who, for good reason, don't feel like they matter because of historical issues and the way that these communities have been treated. But I think that their voice is more important than ever. How do we rally that voice?
I think that is a question that everybody is just somewhat desperately trying to figure out, because in our community, the metastatic breast cancer community, people who are not lily white like me tend to die twice as fast. And so for us, it is literally a matter of life and death. And so I do find that for somebody who is living already with terminal cancer, number one, we don't care so much anymore. Number two, I think there's a crystallizing of things when you are faced with your own mortality. And so making sure that the people who are the most negatively affected by whatever we're talking about are in the room. That to me is one of the things that we can use our white privilege to accomplish. Also, making sure that we're partnering, whatever organization we're part of, making sure that we're partnering with the organizations that are actually serving those communities. Because one thing I've learned as a white person married to a Black person, my husband is very dark skinned, is that I can't speak for him. I can speak up about things, absolutely. And it's my responsibility, especially it's my Black husband and my brown children, to speak up. But I can't speak for their experiences. And so I see a little bit too often that organizations are not pulling in the organizations specifically serving those disenfranchised communities, because they're out there. And we're not supposed to speak for them. And that's not the right thing. We need to bring them alongside us. And that to me is something that's very important.
And to do so, I would say also thinking about the ways that we reimburse the community for their time. Right. I think this is a big sticking point that we have discussed, and something that we're working on with industry, but I think the entire healthcare community needs to focus on is how we value the experience of the patient and the patient's voice and lived experience that they've had in total, but also pay for it. Because if we are expecting patients to show up, if we're industry and we want to do an advisory board and we want to gather the experience of those patients, to pay $100 per hour is ridiculous.
Insulting.
Is the only word. It's exactly insulting. It's insulting. And the fair market value, so to speak, is the words that always get thrown around, right? What's the fair market value? Well, it speaks volumes to see that the fair market value for a clinician, mind you, yes, they see patients, but they are not the patient. There are very few clinicians that are also the patients. To pay, let's say, $600 to $750 an hour, maybe even upwards of near $1,000 an hour for their time is one thing. But then to turn around and then say to a patient, well, your time's only worth $100 an hour. And no extra stipend for travel, no extra stipend for stay, any of those elements, completely ridiculous.
Insulting. Yes. It is incredibly insulting to be the person sitting there with the most valuable part of the discussion and yet to be compensated the least. Yes.
Yeah. And I think that this also speaks to the fair market value calculators that are out there. I think the National Health Council has the most widely discussed and pointed to fair market value calculator. And that's one of the areas that I plan on starting my conversations. I actually have a call with them coming up. It's about something different, but I'm going to definitely bring it up. Where do those numbers come from? And is this the standard because it's what everyone has done? Or is it the standard because we actually did an analysis and we identified what the value is of that time? I think that's a big question to be seen.
100%. And I have been told, sort of like with these pharmacy benefit managers being in between insurance and industry, there are often these marketing companies that are in between pharma and patients organizing ad boards or organizing
Tens of
discussions.
thousands of dollars to organize the discussion. Yep.
Yes. And so it is often these marketing companies in between pharma and the patient, and in my experience, are the ones who are communicating this is what the fair market value is. And I have been told wildly different things by
Sure.
different, so clearly there's no consistency. And because of my background and experience, and I often have just as much education as the other people sitting in the room,
Yeah.
my
If not
pushback
more.
is different than other people, because I'm sitting there saying, wait a second, when I retired, when I closed my law firm, my hourly rate was far more than what
Yeah.
we're talking about. And so, wait a second, what are you paying that person?
Yeah.
Many times they won't tell you, but I've had many colleagues who have privately shared these things with me. And so the numbers you're talking about are the numbers that I've experienced personally.
Yeah.
And so then I'm like, well, I need to be paid the same as everybody else.
Yep.
But that amount of value that I place on myself, some people might call it arrogance, but that is different from a lot of patients. Some patients are so honored that they get to share their experience that's enough for them.
Mm.
And I support that 100%, because however anybody wants to do this patient advocacy thing is up to them. What I try to help people see is that these contracts, these budgets, the paperwork that's coming, from pharma through these pharmaceutical, through the marketing companies to the patient, a lot of times that's the template that they use for the next one. And
Yes.
so if we're thinking about maybe not just myself, but maybe the next patient who's dealing with this pharma company, I try to think in terms of, even if I'm not going to accept an amount of money as an honorarium or whatever, because many people living on disability have a limitation on what they can make before that disrupts their benefits. I try to think about, how can I influence the budget for the next time? And so if I don't want to accept, or, aren't in the position to accept what they might be paying me, what I do is say, then I want that donated to
Yes.
X,
Yep.
so that it's always in the budget for the next time. And so,
Yes.
if you're the type of person who says, I'm getting out of it this honor to be able to share, to be able to influence, to be able to do the thing that feeds my soul, and that's not money,
Great.
That's fine. Just think to the next person and think about how you can advocate for the equality, the fairness of compensation. Even if that's not going to impact you, it'll impact the next person that pharma company is dealing with.
And I would say that you bring up a really good point about all of us, that, if we have a voice, to ensure that other voices are included, number one, which brings me to my point, and I apologize. I'm really clumsy, and
No
I spilled a drink. So
that's important to clean up.
it's part of still some neurological stuff that I deal with, is that my hands, and I'm Italian, so I talk with my hands a lot, and sometimes I'm good that I always have paper towels around me, because these things just go, and Poppy just kind of got on electronics.
Well, and it's amazing when, they start digging around in your body and you want them to fix the bones or fix the structural pieces. There's so much soft tissue and neurological stuff that just gets affected. And, I've loved my surgeons that have done an amazing job on the surgeries that I have had, but the ortho guys just don't think about the soft tissue as much.
They really don't. It's so funny you bring that up, because I remember the last surgeon I had on my spine who fixed the pain issues. He let me go without any collar, right? So he had just fused 11 levels of my spine, and was so confident, you don't need a collar. You're good. You don't need to do any physical therapy. Nothing's moving. It's fine.
Oh my.
But yes, the software issues are real. Right? I mean, I still have vestibular nervous system issues, and right next to my vagus nerve is right where I'm fused. So I'll have panic attacks some days, and for no reason. Right?
Wow.
It's just, that's the day, and today's one of those. So I'm a little shaky, but I know that it's just the residuals of my spine.
Yeah.
right? And I'm lucky at least to be on this side of it.
Yes.
That is now what I complain about rather than the intense 12 out of 10 pain days, right? But
You
to
can
get
be
back,
great. You can be grateful for the thing that you
yeah,
recovered from or you're no longer dealing with, and also at the same time want
yes,
things to be better.
yes. Oh, thank you for that. You know what? That also brings up a really good point, and we'll get back to what we've been speaking about with regards to
Okay.
the fair market value about drugs failing patients, not patients failing a drug.
Such an important distinction that I mean, I still have to correct doctors who automatically
Yeah.
say that. Yeah.
Yeah. So for anyone who's not familiar, if you've taken a medication and it stops working for you, which happens all the time, doesn't matter what the diagnosis is, you take it long enough, your body is like, good, that's good, thank you. I mean, you get there in my case with 30 milligrams a day of Oxycontin, where it's like, yeah, check the box. What's next, right? And it's not that I failed the medication; it's that the medication failed me. Correct?
Yes. 100%. In the cancer space, metastatic cancer space
Yeah.
specifically, we're only alive as long as there's a medication available to treat our cancer. And
Sure.
so as we begin to run out of treatment options, you start to hear some of that verbiage come through with some patients where they're taking on the responsibility
Yeah.
and it legitimately, I have seen this kind of work out in other ways in people's psyche as they talk about even other things where they feel as though they've done something wrong.
Mm,
And that is a burden that no patient should ever bear. There are
especially
many,
metastatic. Yeah.
yes, there are so many reasons why drugs stop working, and cancer
Yep.
is insidious and it is very good
Sneaky.
at mutating. Sneaky. Yes, it is sneaky. That's not our responsibility. The medication failing is not our responsibility. It is not our responsibility when the toxicity of a treatment is too much and we say, I'm done. I cannot live this way. So
Yes.
I think a lot of it is putting the right responsibility in the right place. Not to say that we should be angry at pharma or angry at our doctors.
Sure.
It's more that that is not our burden to carry.
Words matter, right?
It
And I
does.
think
Oh,
and
yes.
that one hit me so hard when we last talked that I went back to the app that I'm building for patients and changed the list of medications that I had tried and failed to the list of medications that failed me.
Oh, I love that.
Because it is so true. You do take on that burden of, oh, I did, and even if you did nothing wrong, there's just that connotation in the back of your head that maybe I should have done something different, or this med should be working for me. It's working for everyone else. What's wrong with me? No,
Yes.
it's just that medication's not the right one for you, and you are special because you are.
Yes.
Everyone's
Yes.
special. I think that's just such a big piece for people to take away is that these medications fail them. They don't fail the meds.
Yes. Absolutely.
You know?
100%. Don't pick
Yeah.
up a burden that's not yours.
They. Oh, I love it. I love it. But going back to the fair market value, and you talking about it's our right, our responsibility to have these discussions,
Yes.
if we're having them, for organizations like mine alone, right? I am driving up the bar for what I pay for people to engage in the market research above the fair market value by about usually it's about $150 over what the current fair market value is. But at the same time, you bring up a really good point about these contracts that take place between organizations like mine and industry, in which we are often asked to use industry's fair market
Yes.
value rate.
Yep.
We can challenge that.
Yes.
We can have that discussion. And if I have clear evidence that I have been paying patients higher than that, then I can bring that as evidence to the table, because all it is a legal team saying, well, I don't know if everyone else is doing it that way. Yep, here's the data. Here, I can show it to you.
Yes.
And it in
Absolutely.
turn serves everyone else when we do that.
100%. I've talked to a lot of the nonprofits. So pharma will approach various nonprofits to get to patients that
Yes.
they need to connect with. And the one that always comes to mind is FORCE, which is the hereditary cancer nonprofit. It stands for Facing Our Risk of Cancer Empowered. And a lot of the nonprofits, FORCE included, will ensure that patients get paid at all. because that is, something that historically often doesn't happen is people,
Yeah.
it's a free type of thing. But one thing that a lot of nonprofits don't always do is challenge the amounts. And so I've challenged some of these nonprofits to say, I'm not going to
Yes.
pass on an opportunity unless you're paying adequate compensation, not just
Yeah.
something at all.
Yeah.
But it's hard to be the organization that takes that stance, because then pharma doesn't come calling as often. And so it's this ecosystem that
Yes.
is a little delicate. And I've
Nobody wants to
long
go
thought,
first.
I know,
But
I've long thought that we should have a union, that patients should unionize so that we're doing some collective bargaining together.
Yeah. A
But
coalition, at least.
yes, absolutely. Because we deserve to be compensated at the value of what we are bringing. And I think it reveals the actual value that is being placed on patient involvement. People say all the right things, but if they don't put their money where their mouth is, that to me is revealing.
Yeah. And I could say we could sit here and do as many economic evaluations as our heart desires, but that rate is probably somewhere near $350 to $400 an hour at minimum.
I totally agree with you. Yes.
Because you're bringing into account the years of lived experience, both pre-treatment and during and post, right?
Yes.
Depending on what that patient's faced and their specific backgrounds and where they grew up and their socioeconomic status, all these metrics that matter so much for clinical trials, for example, well, they should matter just as much when you're thinking about a marketing message or how you bring things to patients or the language that you're going to use. That same value of what you had to dig through to find those patients for that trial is the same exact process now that you have to apply and pay for patients to provide their input and to make sure it's more than adequate in payment. Now, you had talked about force and just hereditary cancers overall, but I think we had kind of skimmed over. You didn't have genomics done early in your diagnosis, and I know that currently, I think the last numbers were still over 60% of patients are not provided tumor profiling or genetics to understand the genetic issues around why they have that cancer or what changed in the cell. Where did that come up for you? And what should patients be looking for or asking for in those cases?
Yeah, so the way it happened for me was, you remember those statistics that they were sharing with me when I asked for the scan, when we discovered that in fact, I had a very high disease burden. That made my doctor go back to the drawing board and say, wait a minute, this just doesn't compute. It doesn't make sense. Yeah. And because I was diagnosed pre-menopause, that is typically a factor for the likelihood of having hereditary cancer. And so at that point, they did the genetic testing to see if my DNA that I inherited from my parents was mutated. And we found a germline mutation at ATM, just like you get money out of the ATM. And then they went back and looked at the genomics or the mutations specifically acquired by the cancer and found even more mutations, which some of them have become actionable. And so legitimately, I believe that if anybody is diagnosed with cancer, that they should immediately be offered not just BRCA, but all of the mutations associated with, and I'm talking specifically in breast cancer, but they did BRCA testing initially for me, and I did not have BRCA mutated. And so the surgeon did not do the full panel. Exactly. And so everyone being offered the full panel of testing. And then for people who have cancer, anytime the cancer changes, you need to have a new genomic test done, not the germline piece, because our genetics don't change, but the cancer does. Sure. And so the pushback that I've heard, number one, is cost, unfortunately, because a lot of companies aren't doing as well as they should in terms of what they reimburse to some of these genetic labs. Right. So the great thing is that companies or organizations like Force exist. There is always copay assistance programs, patient financial assistance if you have Medicare. So I tell people all the time, don't let cost
Yeah.
be a barrier, because there are ways around it. There are ways of dealing with it. There are organizations that specifically provide copay assistance for patients.
Hmm.
And so you might need to get creative to get it covered, right? That's one of the things that can be a little challenging, but you need it every time the cancer changes. Another thing I hear from doctors will be that, well, if the information we get isn't actionable, then what are we, why
Yeah.
would we do it?
Yeah.
The thing is we don't know what's going to be actionable in 6 months, in a
Exactly.
year. And
Yep.
so having the baseline information, having the information each time the cancer mutates so you can see the patterns, that is going to be important, maybe not to the doctor sitting in front of you who doesn't necessarily know how to apply that information.
Yep.
Somebody else will need to use that information. And so patients consistently asking for more information each step along the way, even if you don't quite know what to do with it yet.
Yeah.
That builds the foundation, that builds the database, so that when
Yes.
we know more, we can go back to the database and pull out the things that become relevant.
Yes, the acronym is variant of uncertain significance, right?
Yes,
And
yes.
it's only uncertain until there's enough proof points to say
Yes.
it's now certain. And if we just continue to put our head in the sand and say we're not going to look because we're afraid of those VUSs, variants of uncertain significance, then we don't gather enough data to be able to point us in the right direction.
Yes.
So
And the more
I completely agree with you.
the more people who get genetic testing, the more data they have to look
Yeah.
at all of the results. And so even if your result, like if ATM had been mutated both in my body and in my husband's,
Yes.
that could have meant a very significant developmental issue for my children. And so we got him tested. He has no mutations, which is awesome. And I love that he has no genetic mutations. And so, but I didn't look at that as a negative. I looked at that as, okay, that is a category we don't need to worry about at this moment.
Sure.
But I would not have known that without the testing. And so, I realized that some people, it's hard to live with the specter of the potential of cancer hanging over their heads, right? And so even if you don't want to know, you can get the testing done so that your doctor knows. You don't have to open that envelope if you don't want to specifically know that information, but give your doctor the tools that your doctor needs to make good recommendations for you.
And I would even say for people who may have utilized, for example, Ancestry or any of those services that did DNA screening to identify your heritage, know that the entire genome was sequenced, that you can ask for that data file. And I have my own on my computer here. And believe me, it's a massive data file of all types of sequences of ATs, Gs, and Cs. And you might not know what that means. And there may say, that there's things out of order. But to be able to have that data, to know what you got from your parents, right? Talking about, as you referenced before, just the hereditary component, and to have that on you, that can maybe not have you may not have to have the sequencing done on yourself to understand from your parents. You can just go to the somatic.
Yeah, let me put my lawyer hat on and say, don't do any of that until you have life and disability insurance in place, because health insurance companies under the ACA are not allowed to discriminate against us based on pre-existing conditions or a genetic predisposition for something. But life insurance right now and disability insurance companies are allowed to discriminate based on that information. Now, there's a bill pending to change some of that. But what I tell everyone, based on our current climate, the best thing to do is to have your life and disability insurance squared away. And it's a lot cheaper when you're younger, before you go looking for the potential for any genetic predispositions for anything, because that information could be used in a way that you don't want it to be used.
That is such valuable information. I got my life insurance back at 25, which what 25-year-old does that?
Right?
But I am actually healthier now than I was at 25.
Amazing.
Right? At that point, I was on tons of opiates, and they had those results. So because of that, I had a higher rate.
Yeah.
And I just went back a couple of years ago and redid it, now being off of those meds for 3 years. But again, I did not have the genomic information that I have now, and it's not in my medical record. I keep that for myself, just for the future. To ensure that folks are aware, do you happen to know what that bill is for life and disability insurance that is somewhere?
Not off the top of my head, but
Sure.
I can send you the bill number.
That would
It
be
was
great.
just part of the advocacy day we just did with Force. And yes,
That's a
I will send
vital,
that to you.
vital component for people to know and to be aware of and to vote and to let their representatives know that they feel it's important.
100%. I tell people all the time my experience. When I was going through fertility treatments in order to get pregnant, they did not authorize a genetic screening for me at that point. And so for want of paying $200-$300, my insurance company has now spent $5 million.
Yeah, sure.
Keeping me alive. And, would I have been able to avoid my diagnosis? I don't know. But if I had the information, I might have been able to take prophylactic measures, which is what my other family members are able to do now because of my diagnosis. And so because
you have spoken up for your family members.
Yes, they all know about my diagnosis, and we figured out, where it came from, and which side of the family, and that side of the family has been able to take whatever measures they have wanted to take in terms of prophylactic or screening or whatever. But that type of information, or nothing, yes, absolutely, whatever they want to do. But that kind of information is really, really valuable. And I think that we should bend over backwards more to allow people to have that information. But again, I keep running into this somewhat paternalistic perspective that, well, that'll be too difficult for people.
We can't do it for everyone.
Right. Or they won't know what to do with that, or it'll be psychologically injurious is one of the phrases that I have heard from medical professionals. And I get it. I understand, having been a professional that then filtered the information that I knew to my clients. And I get that that's important and everything else, but I also absolutely 100% believe in self-determination, that we as people, we as individuals, we are the ones who are making the decisions for ourselves. That is our legal right and our legal responsibility. Nobody should be doing that for us unless we have delegated that in some way. And we also have that ability to delegate decision-making to somebody that we trust. But walking into a hospital or walking into a doctor's office doesn't mean that we automatically delegate decision-making to the professionals sitting across the table from us or across the exam room or whatever.
Yes, because at the same time, there are so many providers that I've worked with and continue to work with that don't yet understand that there is a wealth of information inside of that patient on the other side of the table.
Yes. I always said to my clients, I bring the law, you bring the facts. Together, we have to do it together. We have to put those two pieces together. And so I try to use that concept too when I'm talking to some of my team. You bring the medical knowledge and training and experience and everything else. I bring 40 plus years of living inside my body. That is more valuable sometimes in decision making than the recommendations that I've gotten in various contexts. And so that's the piece I don't know that patients value enough.
Yeah.
And, 15-minute, 10-minute appointments, it's hard to convey all of that to the person sitting across the table. Yeah.
You're dead on. And so many times because of life, we don't slow down to think about what we want to say to the doctor or questions that we have. That's one of my missions, is to empower patients to have that time. May it be right before the appointment or the day before, but just to have a goal going into that appointment, to have at least one question that will slow the doctor down and let them see that, oh, you're different. You're not like every other patient, because they will begin to treat you differently.
Yes. The other thing that, as a professional, when people would come to me and ask me a question cold, where I hadn't had the time to think through or research and all of that, it changed a little bit of my perspective too. As I'm asking questions, I've somewhat blindsided perhaps this professional, and not everybody thinks very quickly on their feet, right? Some people need time to kind of to really mull. And so one thing that I've done with some doctors as I've gotten to know them is I'll send those questions in my portal a day or so ahead of time so that they're ready
Yeah.
to answer my questions. And I've had appointments where my doctor literally walked in with the portal message printed out in their hand and was like,
Ah,
okay, question number one, yes. Question number two,
sure.
no.
No.
And
Yeah.
that was incredibly valuable because we honed in on the things that were important to me.
Yeah.
And then, they understood a little bit more about where I was coming from, but they had the
Yes.
time to prepare. So just
That's awesome.
remembering that your doctors are patients too, right? Or
Yeah.
not patients,
That's
people. They're people.
people. We're all people, right? I mean,
Yes.
if we could get rid of the word patient and just see them as people who need to utilize healthcare, I wish that was there was an easier way of saying that,
Yeah.
right? But that's all we are, and physicians, as they say, what do you call the guy who graduated last in med school, guy or gal? Doctor, right? We're all just people
Yes.
working off our lived experience. And
Yes.
it is so vital that you as a patient recognize that you bring a lot to the table as well.
Yeah.
And I just appreciate the work that you have done, Abigail, in fighting not just for yourself and fighting that fight now for 9 years, but also fighting for your loved ones, for your kids, for your family members to understand that information as well. You didn't put your head down and mull through it and just grin and bear it. You got active and you educated. And that is such a vital testimony for everyone to hear, that it doesn't have to be this solo fight as a patient. There's
Yes.
help out there.
100%. And legitimately, as a patient, just filling out a survey after your
Yeah.
appointment, that's advocacy. That's
Yes.
engaging more in your care, reflecting back to the organization what happened in that appointment.
Yeah.
Anytime you ask a doctor a question, that's advocacy. So you don't have to be arguing with your doctor. You don't have to be an expert. You just have to use your voice to speak up in the way that is the most comfortable for you.
Hmm.
And it's not this big, it doesn't have to be the big thing. You don't have to found an organization. You don't have to be on the big stage to be an advocate. You just need to be true to yourself and do it your way.
I absolutely love that. Again, before we break here, I want to bring some attention to Live at Stage 4.
Live
Why don't
from
you tell
stage
our
four.
audience,
Yeah.
live from Stage 4. Can we tell our audience about your show and what your show's all about?
So I have been honored to be asked by Victoria Goldberg, who is our executive producer at Live from Stage 4, to participate in this podcast, which is patterned in some ways after what I was talking about earlier with Project Life. It is the news that MBC patients want by the
Hmm.
MBC patients. So all
Love
of
it.
us on the team are also living with metastatic breast cancer. We interview doctors. We certainly focus on the science. The ASCO annual meeting, the American Association of Clinical Oncology, just finished up. And so we have been
A lot
interviewing
of
doctors
information.
about
Yeah.
all the data that has been presented, but we also interview patients. We have a lovely, what I think is lovely, weekly symptom spotlight where we talk about a symptom that people experience on
Yeah.
particular medication and how people have dealt with it.
I love
I
that.
found more hacks and more
Yes.
like just, uh, what is it when you're taking a medication off
Mm,
label application of things like over the counter and all of that people use
sure.
to manage your quality of life. And so we really try to focus on what are the things that are going to improve people's quality of life. Certainly the scientific information
Yeah.
and we find those doctors who are able to translate the science into digestible, understandable information, but then also hearing from patients with that lived experience, which arguably I think is probably the most valuable piece.
It's an unbelievable opportunity to be educated about the metastatic breast cancer community, about the treatments that are available, about life and living with this condition. I cannot thank you enough for all of the work that you do for patients, being one myself, and just knowing what it can be like to think that you're all alone, to know that
Yeah.
there's an organization like Project Life out there that's providing not just resources for patients, but resources for their caregivers, their kids, their parents. You've thought about the whole ecosystem of what that patient lives through and have come alongside of each of those people that help in that fight. I think, if I'm not mistaken, the last stat I had seen was somewhere around, I think it's 3.5 don't tell me how you get 3.5 people, but for every one person that's been diagnosed with cancer, there's usually about 3 or 4 that go through it with them. So we're all going to be
Yeah.
touched at some point by it.
Yes.
Why not get engaged now? Get yourself educated when you're healthy.
Yes.
And
That's the
at
most
least
important
know where
time.
the resources are, right?
Absolutely. Yes. And, going back to Force and the work that I help with some of the support groups there, while it's only about 12% that breast cancer is about 12% is linked to a genetic predisposition for
Yeah.
cancer. I actually believe it's much, much higher than that. We just haven't
We
discovered
just don't know. Yeah.
the genes yet. And so that has become something very important to me, is just that people are getting their screenings done, getting genetic testing done, because as we know more, people are going to be able to live longer. People are going to be able to live better. And it's really not a question of if for most of us. It is a question
Yeah.
of when.
I've heard that for both breast cancer for women and prostate cancer for men, that
Yeah.
if you live long enough as a male, you're going to get prostate cancer.
Yeah.
It's just one of those androgen-driven cancers, right? The cells
Yes.
have broken down and don't know how to turn off their need for testosterone. And in breast cancer with estrogen, it can very much be the same. But obviously, there are different types of breast cancers and what they're fed by. But as you said, they're sneaky little bastards, and they find a food supply in some way. But
Yes.
the more we know about it, via genetics and by the tumor profiling, the more we know how to mount the fight.
Absolutely. And knowing that there are options and there's treatments available, and that it is something that can be lived with, you're living with it, you're not dying from it, right? Is a tagline that we use a lot in our community. So, but the community that you talked about, being able to come alongside people, there are certainly downsides of that, because people living with terminal cancer die. We just had somebody in our community die very recently, and that was just a devastating blow.
Yeah.
And so I always think, with that downside of this work, with the struggle, the burden, et cetera, is it worth it? And the very next day after I went to her funeral, somebody who was newly diagnosed contacted me, and I knew it was worth it, because that person now is set up to begin this experience in a very different way than they were before we had that conversation. I'm not going to say I fixed anything, but it was more that she knew that she wasn't alone in the experience. And while it's sad to lose people, it's still worth it to connect with the next person who's diagnosed.
Well, like you said, your organization has redefined it as living with this condition.
Right.
We're all going to die someday.
True.
Right? We're all dying every day. Ultimately, it's getting into ensuring that we're all educated about what we're living with.
Yes.
Whatever that condition may be, and being as educated and empowered as possible for that self-determination, as you talked about, to ensure that you are prepared to engage in the fight, not be a passive participant, be an actively engaged individual in your own care.
That is, to me, the only thing we can do when we're faced with something serious, when it's especially when we're having to interface with the U.S. healthcare system as it is right now, that is just so very important.
And we will be continuing to mount the fight, as I know you will, every day, to ensure that our legislators hear from our communities and ensure that our voice doesn't go by the wayside. There's so much that we can all do. May it be voting with our feet, as Abigail has said, or may it be at the at the ballot box itself.
Yes.
We can all impact this system and make it into what it should be for all of us as individuals that participate in it.
Absolutely. The bottom line is showing up for it, right?
That's right.
And, we always talk every time we have an election about voter turnout. Mm-hmm. And my husband, who is a naturalized citizen, he and we have voted in every election we have been, permitted to, based on where we lived and criteria and things like that, because that is how we show up in this country. And so I hope there's a big voter turnout as we enter this season of elections.
I know that we will both be doing all that we can to ensure that there is. So,
yes.
Abigail, I It's been a privilege to hear your story, for you to share with our community the valuable knowledge that you have and that you continue to provide every day. We'll ensure to link both to Project Life and to Live from Stage 4 in the note when this episode goes live, so that patients can have it easily have the opportunity to access that. But any final words?
I knew you were going to ask me that. I think the biggest thing that I have taken away from my experience is you need to value yourself the way that you would value a loved one. And so if you are sitting in a doctor's appointment, if you are having an experience within healthcare or otherwise, and you would not want your loved one to experience what you're experiencing, then you know you need to speak up.
I love that. I love it. My final question for you was going to be, what would you tell your 20-year-old self? But I think that nails it on the head as well.
That is probably what I would tell my 20-year-old self. Yes, absolutely.
Yes.
That and get genetic testing.
There you go. There you go. Well, what we'll also do is link to Force as well.
Wonderful.
So if anyone's interested in learning more about that and understanding what is available, it's also something that we're doing through the Advocate Bridge website for anyone who's looking for a patient advocacy organization. They can go to advocatebridge.org, put in, it could be breast cancer, it could be whatever indication that they're facing, and we'll curate all of the disease state nonprofits that are out there to support patients, but also all of the financial support options that you said that are out there are also going to be listed. And we'll ensure that, I want to double check that Force is also listed on that financial side as well for the hereditary cancer screenings.
It's a wonderful resource. And, when you're at the beginning of a diagnosis, you just don't know what you don't know. Yep. And being able to go one place where all of that is listed is very valuable. It's really hard to find stuff on your own.
I'll go back to when we both entered big colleges. Everything got a lot easier when you knew where things were and you knew your way around and you kind of knew some of the lay of the land and what the different building names were, right? You're just giving yourself that little bit of education to feel secure. And that's what I would advise anyone to do.
100%. Absolutely.
Well,
thank you for the opportunity.
So
yes, it's been
wonderful
having this conversation.
Thank you so much.